you so much for coming to Delaware Valley University today, Josh, to talk about gambling and all that goes with it.
Great to be here, Jake. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, can you just tell me how the landscape has changed? I mean, I know you can focus more on Pennsylvania, but really in recent years, how has the landscape of gambling changed?
Yeah, it's changed quite dramatically. So I've been with the council now for, about 15 years or so. And in that time, what we've seen is just nothing short of extraordinary. We've seen more casinos open across the state. And then in 2018, we saw a major shift in terms of what was available in a legal format of regulated gambling. And that was part of a big expansion that happened. It was in the 2017-2018 timeframe that we really saw a lot of the legalization take place and the availability start to roll out. And what it looked like was some expansion of existing types of gambling, but the main component there was this availability now of online opportunities. Online opportunities with regard to casino types of games. So now instead of going to a casino to play a slot machine or a table game, folks have the ability to do it on their mobile apps, and that was pretty significant. But the really big piece that I want to talk about today is the availability of sports betting. That was something that changed in 2018 as part of a piece of legislation that was for a long time limiting where sports betting was legally allowed to be offered. And as part of that ruling, it basically became something that was available across the country should states decide that it was in their best interest to have it. And it expanded very, very quickly. Within a period of about 5 years, we now have 38 states that have legalized sports betting in some way, shape, or form. And in Pennsylvania, we have it available both in a brick and mortar option, so you could go to a sports book and actually place wagers at a facility. But much more popular than that would be the online mobile sports betting, that type of thing. So now with an internet connection and accessibility on a device, you can very easily log into an account and place a whole wide range of different types of sports bets. Other
than obviously the convenience, are there any other major differences between doing something online? Is there like more options when you place a bet online, or you like use a slot machine online versus going in person to a casino?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the start of that question, and it's all about the convenience. So as far as the gameplay, sitting in a machine that's in front of you in a physical location, that might have a certain impact. It's visual. There's the sounds and the sights and all the feelings and everything that might come along with that. And you might not be able to mimic that directly on a phone or on a mobile device, but that accessibility. Before, if somebody wanted to play a slot machine in Pennsylvania, they would have to wake up in the morning and brush their teeth and get dressed and drive to a facility or take a bus to a facility or whatever the case is. Now you can basically eliminate all that. You just reach over your nightstand, grab your device, and you could be in a virtual casino within seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a crazy change where you had to plan your day almost around it, and now it's so easy to, be doing it at work, you can be doing it, you get stuck in traffic for a minute, you can so easily just pull it up and spin a slot machine. And I just think that dynamic is really one of the bigger issues now with young people getting caught up in online gambling. And really I'm trying to focus on the youth getting caught up in it and what I'm trying to write and what I'm trying to inform people about. So what are some major factors, especially for young people, getting caught up in online gambling?
Yeah, so that's a great question and something that's really important to talk about. I want to just be clear that at the council and then personally, we take a neutral stance on gambling. So we're not a group that's trying to end gambling or saying that it's a bad thing. It's an activity that for most people remains fun and is entertaining, right? And that's a good thing. If somebody wants to go to a casino or log into a sports book or whatever the case is, and they're able to have fun, hopefully we're not going to see any harm come from that. And I don't mean to present that we're trying to get in the way of that. But the concern is that with each of these activities, there's risks. And that's the thing, is if someone's not aware of the risks or aware of ways to maybe put some type of barrier or speed bump in between themselves and those risks, that's where we sometimes see things escalate. And with younger folks having all of this access to different forms of gambling, which younger folks typically are much more comfortable in terms of using technology and accessing sites and apps and different types of programs. The concern is that if they're not aware of those risks, because there's not a lot of prevention education related to gambling in schools and throughout that early part of life, the concern is that we're going to see folks come of age, or maybe not be of legal age, but still participate, not recognize some of those risks, and then very quickly fall into a cycle where it's not the healthiest relationship that's developing.
And I know you just mentioned about there being an age restriction in Pennsylvania. It's 21, but people getting access earlier. And I know some people, their parents are so open, they'll give their kids their social security information so they can register before they're of age. There's apps like Fliff or Bovada where you can do workarounds to place online bets, or even just as simple as somebody giving someone who has an account $20 to go put a bet down for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that folks are accessing it, and some of the benefits of having regulations in place are designed to help, among other things, protect folks. And that's where the regulated forms of gambling, where, whether it's casinos or sports books or whatever, where there are those age requirements of 18 or 21, depending on what type of activity. With regard to all those other types that are unregulated and in constant legal battles in terms of defending themselves against being, investments or games of skill or whatever the case is, they've been able to dodge having that regulation stamp applied to them. And a lot of that comes from court rulings and that type of thing. And, what's concerning about that is that puts folks in a position where there's limited protections associated with these types of games. And when we have experience in seeing what the relationship to these games can sometimes develop into in a problematic way, that to us is very concerning. Because without those protections, we're kind of left at a situation where all we can focus on now is outreach and building awareness. So that's what it comes down to, is the earlier and the more robust we can develop prevention programs and education-based programs and have discussions like this one, where we're talking about not, again, that it's something that you should or shouldn't do, but talking about just be aware of the risks. I'm fairly confident in saying that nobody ever wakes up and says, today I'm going to develop a gambling problem. That sounds like a good thing to do, right? And I think that goes right across the lifespan. So younger folks, older folks, nobody's intention is to have a problem. So if we can approach an activity with a little bit of preparation and a little bit of awareness and keep ourselves in a place where that's not going to happen, that's a good thing. It's just a matter of having all of the different pieces fit together so that we could actually have that message be impactful. And that's one of the challenges that we face.
And as you mentioned, it's something that can just be a fun activity, but can really start to turn into an addiction. And like you said, no one wakes up and chooses it. It's something that happens slow and over time. And it could be easy just to lose sight of it. So what are some early signs of when it's transitioning from a hobby to an addiction?
It's a great question and really important, because we have to think about it from that fact that, if you have somebody with a substance use problem, right, there's going to be a physical impact. So you're going to be able to see, wow, that person's, their eyes are glassy, or you could smell alcohol on their breath, or they were passing out, or whatever the case is. With gambling, you typically don't see that. We have situations where people are able to hide their gambling addiction from employers, from educators, from their own loved ones at home. And there's situations where, because it's so accessible, it might be challenging, not impossible, but it might be challenging for somebody to get to a casino before work or after work or before school or after school or whatever the case is without having anybody else know about it. But now, like you mentioned before, you can access it in traffic. You can access it while you're waiting for a meeting. You can access it in a restroom. You can access it anywhere. And that's the thing is, when we have those types of increased levels of access, and we're looking at an activity like this where it is a slow progression, it can be difficult. So what we're often faced with is trying to identify behavioral signs and cues that may indicate that something's changing. And if you know somebody's gambling, if you know that somebody gambles, if they have accounts, if they have, if they go to a casino regularly or whatever the case is, you can kind of look at how their relationship is with gambling to identify maybe things are not necessarily a problem, but they're changing in a way that's not the healthiest. So maybe they're talking about, increasing their bet limits, or maybe they're increasing how much time they're spending involved in the activity. Maybe they're, instead of going to a casino with friends, they're starting to go by themselves so they can stay as long as they want, and they're not restricted by anybody else's time frame. And a lot of times, again, not that any of those are necessarily dedicated to a problem, but it's those small changes that can really start to amplify. And that's what we often see is this snowball effect where one small change leads to another, because that small change, even though it might be an isolated incident to some people, for others it might be the first time that's what the change is going to happen, right? And it can start to become a habitual thing. And as that becomes easier for somebody to do, that's when we start to see more and more expansion of the actual problematic development. It's even trickier when you don't know that somebody's gambling at all. And going back to what I was talking about before, that hidden side of things, that's where we can sometimes start to talk about any lifestyle changes that we see where somebody might become, maybe for a student, maybe we start to see sudden unexplained drop in grades or academic performance. Maybe we start to see somebody not necessarily taking care of themselves, their appearance. They no longer really care about, making sure that before they leave, they look a certain way or that they're communicating a certain way. Maybe there's a high level of irritability all of a sudden. Maybe we start to see that somebody's, behaviors just don't quite add up to how they used to react to certain situations. And while we can't always assign that to a gambling issue, again, it's one of those things where it's so important that we all recognize that within gambling, that idea of hiding it is so prominent that it's always a possibility, especially with how readily available gambling activities are these days. So, it's a long and very complicated answer to a really, really simple question. And again, there's a lot of layers to it. So it's really going to be one of those looking deeper at what is somebody's involvement in the activity that we're talking about, whether it's sports betting or going to a casino. And if we don't even know about it, just looking for changes that may be kind of difficult to pinpoint. Why is somebody's personality changing so much? And it could be related to something like this.
I know there have been times I've gotten to class early or a meeting, or I just have 15 minutes to kill, and then I'll go in, I'll make like a parlay and throw $1 or $2 on it. And
sure.
By no means do I consider myself addicted, but it's just how easy it is that I have 10 minutes of free time, and I do think, let me kill it by go making a bet.
And we see that, right? We see that, if you didn't have that on your phone, it's not something you probably do, right? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't say, well, I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to go place a phone call to place a wager, or I'm going to, drive around and stop at a sports book and go into a facility, right? So it's that ease of access is what kind of opens the door. And not to say that you placing that $1 or $2 parlay, whether it's, if that's within your financial budget, that's great, and if it's fun and it's entertaining to you, that's great, and keeping that healthy activity. But you can see how much of a time filler that could be, and how that could turn into, for some people, what's the outcome of that wager, right? You place that $1 or $2 parlay, what's the impact that has on you, right? On you or on somebody else that's placing a similar wager? Is it, oh, I won, and I won 20 or 30 bucks, that was great and fun, right? Or is it, geez, that $1 parlay that had 3 legs, I got 2 of them and missed the third, I was so close. What message is that sending? Because that is exactly the same outcome as somebody who has none of the legs matched, right? So, it can send sort of that near miss, and it's very similar to what we see with slot machines, like old slot machine style gambling, where you would have, a cherry would be a win, but that feeling that somebody who's participating in that slot machine play, that cherry feels very similar to them than cherry banana would, right? Because they feel like they were so close. And, even though the outcome is the same as somebody that had like banana, cherry, watermelon, right? But there's something about that closeness. And with today's society, we're a society that's built on, if you do something and you don't get the optimal outcome, if we just try a little bit harder, maybe next time it'll work out for us. So that cherry banana, maybe if I keep playing, I can turn it into that cherry that I'm looking for. And the same thing goes for sports books is, you know, that $1 bet that may have been placed innocently, maybe you look at that and say, geez, I hit 2 of the 3 legs. Maybe next time, if I just study a little bit more, if I pay a little bit more attention, if I watch Sports Center for an extra half hour, maybe I'll get that insight that I need to next time place that correct wager, if that makes sense. So a lot of times that can be really, really impactful in terms of what the next steps are going to be. And, you know, obviously, as somebody continues placing wagers, maybe that $1 or $2 parlay isn't going to provide the same sense of satisfaction or satisfy that urge that somebody may have. And maybe that $1 or $2 parlay, kind of like I talked about before, maybe that starts to increase to a $4 or $5 parlay. And again, not to say that if that's within your budget, that's a problem, but you can see that little change, that could be the first step towards maybe an unhealthy relationship. What's really important to remember too is that, you know, we hear about people that can gamble and have fun with it and there's no problem. And then we hear often stories about people who've lost their home and their spouses and, you know, all of their kids' college funds and that type of thing. But there's a wide range of different levels of problems that can really develop. I mean, it might be no more than somebody's just spending a little bit more than they should be, whether it be time or money or whatever the case. But then there's a lot of ways that it can start to impact different areas of life. We might see somebody who's gambling, spend a little bit too much time focusing on it, and maybe their grades do decline. Or maybe they start to, you know, miss some of the responsibilities they have in their daily life or at work or whatever the case is. So there's, again, a lot that can really happen. It's not just as simple as saying, well, I have a gambling problem or I don't. There's a lot that really happens within that whole continuum.
What are the best ways you think we can prevent somebody from developing a gambling problem? I know we talked about recognition and how it's grown, but what are some ways we can prevent it, and how has prevention strategies also changed?
Yeah, it's an important thing to discuss because and a challenging one, right? Because how do we prevent somebody from doing something that they want to do, or you know, and that's really the goal, is not trying to prevent folks from participating in gambling activities. We're trying to prevent problem gambling. And that's sometimes misunderstood and misconstrued because we don't necessarily want to send a message where we're saying don't do something. But we want to send a message of, you know, if you are going to do something, in order to stay as safe as possible, let's engage in some potential rules and follow some guidelines that might help you kind of stay in a safer place. And that's really a big part of what we do, is try to increase messaging throughout counties, throughout Pennsylvania, that just talk about, you know, some of the risks, identify statistics and probability and odds and outcome. You know, so through increased activities and experiential learning, we can hopefully help people recognize that the house always wins, and that, you know, casinos are built based on, you know, revenue that they generate. And, you know, we see the numbers that come out from the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board on an annual basis. I mean, it's staggering just how much money is being wagered and lost in Pennsylvania and across the country all throughout the year. You know, that's happening largely in part because there is that odds that's always going to be in favor of the operator, right? So just making that as clear as possible that, yes, it can be fun and it can be entertaining and you might win, but the odds are in the long run that it's not going to be a favorable outcome. So as long as you're keeping yourself in a place where, you know, just like going to a movie, if you go to a movie and spend, you know, whatever, the $15 for the ticket and the $1,000 for the popcorn and stuff, you know, it might be a good movie and it might be worth what you just paid, or it could be a lousy movie. And, you know, you're not getting your money back. So treating gambling very much the same way, is that's the cost of my entertainment. And I may go and win money and have a favorable outcome, or I might go and lose. But at the same time, you know, the same way I feel about it after I'm done, I had fun and it didn't have a negative impact on my life. So making sure that if we're doing something like that and we're having those feelings, don't base it on money or favorable outcomes as much as place it on, was it still within your limits? Was it still comfortable to you? Was it fun? Did you have a good time? Was it fun going out with all of your friends and, going to a sports bar and placing wagers, and then, I lost, but I had a good night. It was fun. Or is it driving you to try to win back that money? And that's a lot of the guidelines would be keeping things to limits, putting a limit on how much time you're going to spend doing it, not letting it exceed other areas of your life in terms of importance. Obviously, money limits. And then also just focusing on keeping it as an entertaining activity, not using it as a way to make money. Because all too often, that's something that can be really clouded, is if somebody starts to look at gambling as a way to maybe supplement income or pay off bills, or to do that instead of working at a job or whatever, that's where we can sometimes start to see that chasing of losses take place, where people really become fixated on turning past losses into wins.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like we always hear people say, don't chase your losses, you try to make up what you lost. And even when I'm watching like sports games, sometimes I think legally they have to put that in there sometimes. Like there's the one where I think it's Kurt Warner who comes on and kind of will talk about like how to do it responsibly. The one commercial, and that's one of the things, is don't chase your losses, have a limit. I feel like that's, for something that is fairly new with online sportsbooks, that's something you are hearing a lot, is people emphasizing those two things: have a limit and don't chase your losses.
Yeah, they're two very solid points, and they're really built from a lot of the more clinical diagnostic criteria in terms of what is used in assessments to diagnose a gambling problem. That's really where those ideas stem from, is that, if someone is chasing losses, trying to win back money that was lost on a previous bet, that's typically a hallmark signature sign of a potential gambling issue. So focusing, the spotlight on those types of topics, I think that is really, it's important, it is good. And I think we're seeing this kind of transition from not having that messaging and part, in terms of ads like the Kurt Warner ad, to having different operators now come out with very specific messaging that focuses on trying to keep things in a safe place. But, I think that's part of it. I think the responsibility really falls on everybody's shoulders. So, a lot of times we'll see messaging that directs players to stay responsible, to do this, to follow these rules. And that is important, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it should fall entirely on the shoulders of the individual. I think everybody that benefits, whether it be the operators or advertisers or sports leagues or states, whatever it is, everybody really needs to play their role in terms of taking responsibility, especially if there is any type of benefit that's coming from it financially. So having these conversations and really just making sure that there's transparency in messaging, that's so important.
When I was doing research, I saw something on The Guardian that it was over 2 times per minute that in an NBA or NHL game that an ad or a reference to sports gambling comes up. And it's just so prevalent. And do you think that increased advertisement makes the younger generation more vulnerable to gambling?
In terms of vulnerability, I think that, it's that question of exposure and normalization. And I don't know that an advertisement is going to convince a younger person that, wow, this is something I should do. But the concern is that when it becomes just a normal part of the game, and watching a sports, I mean, you just said it, right? Like every 2 minutes, multiple times every 2 minutes, you see some type of reference, whether it be mentioning it, an advertisement, or just a logo on a screen. It's continuous. And when something becomes normalized, a lot of times that's where we gloss over some of the potential risks that are associated with it. So again, not saying that that's bad, that there's too much or it shouldn't be. I mean, that's obviously a debatable topic, right? But I think when we have young folks that are exposed to that, if there's not messaging that goes along with it, there's no preparation. And that's the goal. The goal is really making sure that as younger folks become older and transition into, and emerge into adulthood, what decision making is going to be based off of what they learned at a younger age. And again, it's not to say that you should or shouldn't gamble, right? Because it's tough. I mean, some kids, they see their parents who place wagers or they enjoy it. So, what message is that sending? It's without that level of education, and preparation for what to expect once you're of age to start doing that, or even not of age to start doing it, but just having access. That's what's really concerning, is that they're going to enter into this whole new world of opportunity and not be prepared for what risks may accompany that. So that's what we spend a lot of time on, is just talking about the fact that, it's not about shielding folks from it, because you can't, right? If you're going to turn on the TV, whether it be to watch a Phillies game or an Eagles game or a Giants game or America's Funniest Videos, you're going to see something, right? There's going to be an advertisement at some point. So you can't completely shield folks from it, but it's about increasing resiliency and making sure that everything that they're exposed to is something that they at least have some knowledge about, so that if and when they are faced with making a decision about participating, it's not going to be something that's a problem for them, hopefully.
As we get ready to close out here on the podcast, is there anything you would like to talk about, anything you'd like to mention?
I just, I think it's really important just to always mention that if someone is wondering if they have an issue, or if they're wondering if somebody's close to them has an issue, there's so many resources that someone has access to. Our website, which is pacouncil.com, we try to keep that as up to date as possible. A lot of what we always focus on is going back to the helpline, which is the 1-800-GAMBLER number. That's a phone line that is accessible 24 hours a day. There's live help on the other end of that call. and that might be information. It could be information about resources that exist. It could be counseling options or meetings or different tools. And we do have a lot of tools that really kind of run the range. So traditionally, we had that helpline in place where people would need to call, right? It's a phone number. But over the years, we've expanded that, and a lot of that was to keep up with some of the current technology. So we have options for folks to chat with a helpline specialist. You can actually use your phone and text back and forth with a specialist, and you can get more information without needing to necessarily pick up the phone. And as we transition, we're starting to see more and more different types of technology come to the forefront. Things like apps, recovery-based apps that are gambling specific, where folks can have daily check-ins, and they can, without a counselor or without going to meetings, you can actually access some really, really great technological assistance and resources through an app on your phone. And we have access to all of those different types of available options on our website. So, I think that's an important piece, is just knowing that resources exist, but also just knowing where to turn to get them. And between the helpline number and our website in Pennsylvania, both serve as options that really do have a lot of help and information for people.
Yeah, I'm sure all that very helpful, and I wish more people were aware of it.
Me too. But that's what we do. We continue just trying to make more and more folks aware of it. We've sometimes I joke, I have a very simple job of teaching 13 million people of a phone number.
Yeah.
Right. And when it comes down to it, if at the end of the day, everybody in Pennsylvania knows that if they have any type of issue, or if they need help for a gambling concern, they can call that phone number. That's a big check in that column. I think it's a very good thing. But again, just having those conversations, really educating folks that there are these risks, and we can have that conversation without assigning a good or a bad a good or bad stamp on the activity. It's really just about what can we do to make sure that everybody's staying as safe as possible through the help of everyone who's involved.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.